Hello, welcome to lesson 4 in Spiral 2. So today what are we covering? We're looking at angles and parallel lines. Alright, so we're looking at what we want to be able to do is be able to understand the theorems related to angles involving parallel lines. So parallel lines, basically we have a transversal. Transversal is a fancy word for a line that crosses two parallel lines. So these two lines are parallel. Parallel lines are lines that will never ever cross. And transversal is a line that just crosses those lines. All right, so as stated. So there we are. That's your terminology. So moving down, we have these particular patterns that this should be reviewed from your grade 7 and 8 course. So I have dots showing or indicating the angles that are in fact equal. So with your note here, you want to take a highlighter, a different color, because this, I'm not going to even bother with the official names because we don't really care. I want you to be able to identify the patterns. So this is an example of our Z pattern. All right. In the Z pattern, the armpits, all right, the armpits are equally stinky in the Z, all right? You never have your left armpit smelling better than your right. It just doesn't work that way. Our armpits always are equally stinky. So that means that these two angles inside the armpit of the Z are equal. And also the outside angles, so I'll use X's, these two will be equal because technically, I'll just use a dashed line here, we could draw a Z that looks like this. So that's our Z pattern. So your armpits are always the same amount of stinkiness. The next one. This one is, I'm going to draw it a little bit different. So here, I'm going to highlight this for you. So this is our F pattern. It's one of the fancy Fs. It's on an angle. So there's our F pattern. Your armpits of the F are equally stinky. Remember, left armpit, always the same as the right. So the armpits of the F are here and here, so those two are equal. And then as the dot indicates, those two are also equal. So the key with this is identifying your F pattern. I'll put it on an angle so you can see it. All right. Next, if we have two angles inside of parallel lines, so here's our parallel line, transversal, parallel line. This is what we call our C shape. All right, and with the C shape, these two values, I'm going to switch them to letters here. So let's call this one A and this one B. Inside there, we know that A plus B has to add up to 180 degrees. Why is that? Well, think of it this way. If I was to close off this shape and make it a parallelogram, we know that there's 360 degrees inside a parallelogram. And don't circle this, I don't want to wreck yours. This is half of a parallelogram, so half of 360 is 180. So that's why those two angles add up to 180. The last one here, when any two lines cross, we have these angles being equal. So this is what I call the X pattern. Two lines crossing, that's why I call it the X. Opposite angle theorem, so any two angles inside there will be equal. So these two would be equal, and those two would be equal. So there you go. Those are your basic patterns. Like I said, I'm not worried about you knowing supplementary angle theorem, complementary angle theorem. It doesn't matter to me. I want you to be able to identify the patterns, and from those patterns determine equal angles. Flipping over, looking at the next note, we have examples. It says find the indicated angle. So what you could do if you want, you can pause the video at this point and try them on your own. Okay, now that you tried them on your own, let's take a look and see how you did. So the first one here in the top left corner, when we look at this, what pattern do we see? Well, we know that we have parallel lines. So if I draw the shape, I see this is actually my Z pattern with the Z pattern. Armpits are equally stinky. Therefore, I'm going to call it X equals 97 degrees. All right, so there's your Z pattern. Next one, the two angles are inside. All right, they're inside. So what I see is exactly that. I see the C. So there is our C pattern. It's a backwards C, so it's like kindergarten when you drew your C's backwards. And what do we know from that? We know that the two angles inside add up to 180 degrees. So that means that 125 plus the unknown is 180. Using our algebra, we're going to subtract 125 from both sides to keep the teeter-totter balanced. And we end up with B equals 55 degrees. All right, cruising right along. Third example here. So this one's kind of interesting because it's kind of a trick question because the angles are on opposite sides. So we could go with the opposite angle theorem, or we could go with our x, which means that we know this angle is 75 degrees. But that doesn't help us out. We need to find that angle. Well, we know on a straight line, all right, so on this straight line, if we went all the way around it like this, that would be 180 degrees. So that means that 75, so this 75 plus my unknown, it's going to add up to 180. So using algebra skills again, balancing our teeter-totter, I'm going to subtract 75 from both sides. We end up with A equals 105 degrees. All right, and the difficulty will continue to increase as we go along with these examples. So we want to find this angle over here. So this one's going to take a couple of steps. So let's figure out what we do know. We know we have two parallel lines, which means that I have an X pattern right there. So that X pattern tells me that this is 55 degrees. Now, I have a Z pattern. All right, so my Z pattern is going to look like this. So there's my Z pattern, and that tells me that these equally smelly armpits at the equal angle, so I know that's 55 degrees. Now, our last step is we see that that line and that line are intersecting. Because they're intersecting, creates the X pattern, which gives me 55 degrees. So therefore, the missing angle is 55 degrees. So that one, recap, step one was my X pattern, step two is the Z pattern, and step three was another X pattern. So you need to kind of work your way through using the various patterns to find your answer. Next one. Well, this one looks familiar, right? They try to trick you with different numbers, but in the end, it's the same process. X pattern, so that means that's 58 degrees. Z pattern means this is 58 degrees. And finally, an X pattern, which tells you that as well is 58 degrees. All right, so you need to be able to work your way through or explain it. Now this one has a ton of lines here. It's got three parallel lines working. So what we need to do is focus on what do we want to know. We want to know this angle here. And what do I know? I know that angle there. So what pattern do we see right here? Okay, don't scream because I can't hear you, right? This is a video. All right, silly people. So anyway, here's our parallel line. Here's a parallel line. We connect them, and we have our C pattern. All right, again, kindergarten C, it's backwards, which tells us that the two angles inside will always add up to 180 degrees. So we have 58 plus B equals 180. Using your algebra skills, we're going to subtract 58 from both sides, balance the equation. So we'll have 130, 122, I believe is our final answer. So very important for you to try these examples, all right? Do the assigned homework because it's good practice. Make sure you use a highlighter to help you with your patterns. You're looking for your X pattern, your Z pattern, your F pattern, your C pattern. And if you're having trouble, that's when you need to go and ask the teacher for assistance. So don't be afraid to ask for help because these can be challenging. I'm not going to say they're easy. There are some questions that are becoming very challenging, especially when you have a ton of lines in there and you got to figure out what patterns you do see. If you have any questions, make sure you ask the teacher, and we will see you in the next video.